The rain falls mercilessly on a tree-lined suburban street. Elegant homes with manicured lawns stand like silent witnesses to the scene unfolding before one particular residence. A man in his early 40s stands motionless on the sidewalk, rainwater streaming down his face, mixing with what might be tears. His hands rest protectively on the shoulders of two children, twins, a boy and a girl no more than 10 years old. Moving men shuttle boxes from the house to a waiting truck. The front door is held open by an elegant woman in her 60s, dressed in expensive clothes that seem impervious to the downpour. Her face is a mask of cold determination. "You never belonged here anyway," Victoria Harrington says coldly. Michael Parker has nowhere to go except a rundown house on the wrong side of town. He works 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, while his children ask when they can go home. What Michael doesn't know is that his late wife Sarah has left him something that will change everything. A lawyer is searching for him with news about a $200 million inheritance. But will this money heal the pain of rejection or teach him what family really means? Every parent's worst nightmare is losing their spouse and having to raise their children alone. But imagine being thrown out of your home by your own family just weeks after burying your wife. That's exactly what happened to Michael Parker. Michael Reed had never thought much about money until he didn't have any. Sitting on the front steps of the dilapidated house on Maple Avenue, watching paint peel from the shutters in long, deliberate strips, he turned Sarah's wedding ring over and over between his fingers. The simple gold band caught the afternoon light, reflecting memories of a time when love seemed enough to conquer anything. They had met at the Metropolitan Museum of Art 6 years ago. Michael was there researching for an article on war paintings for the history journal he contributed to alongside his teaching position. Sarah was sketching visitors, her blonde hair falling like a curtain across her face as she worked. When she looked up at his approach, her green eyes held a warmth that made him forget whatever clever opening line he'd prepared. "You're blocking my view of the soldier's face," she said, pencil poised mid-stroke. "I'm sorry. I was just admiring how you've captured the light in the painting." She tilted her head, studying him with frank curiosity. "I wasn't painting the artwork. I was painting you looking at it. You stood there for 20 minutes. What were you seeing that took so long?" That was Sarah, direct but never harsh, curious about everything and everyone. She came from the kind of family that appeared in the society pages of newspapers, but she wore faded jeans and paint-stained sweaters to galleries. Her father, Richard Harrington, owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Her mother, Victoria, traced her lineage back to banking pioneers and spoke in the clipped tones of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Michael's family ran a small bookstore in a neighboring town. His father worked with his hands, knew the names of every customer, and believed that a man's worth was measured by his integrity rather than his bank account. When Michael brought Sarah home for the first time, his parents welcomed her with the kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. When Sarah brought Michael to meet the Harringtons, the reception was decidedly cooler. "Teaching is a noble profession." Richard Harrington's tone made clear it was anything but. The dining room of the Harrington mansion stretched around them, the table long enough to seat 20, though only 4 were present. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier overhead, refracting it across the white tablecloth like scattered diamonds. Of course, positions at prestigious universities pay considerably more than public ones. "Michael wants to make a difference in the community," Sarah replied, her hand finding his under the table, a small act of rebellion against the judgment flowing from her parents. "He believes education should be accessible to everyone." How idealistic. Victoria's smile was as cold as the silver serving dishes arranged before them. Despite their disapproval, Sarah had chosen Michael. They were married in a small ceremony in the garden of the Harrington estate, though Victoria made it clear she would have preferred something grander. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress not because she couldn't afford something new, but because she loved the story behind it. Her grandmother had eloped during the Depression, choosing love over social expectations. "She was my inspiration," Sarah told Michael on their wedding night, sitting on the edge of their hotel bed, her grandmother's lace veil still pinned in her hair. "She taught me that real wealth has nothing to do with money." The twins arrived 2 years later. Ethan with Michael's analytical mind and protective instincts. Lily with Sarah's artistic soul and thoughtful nature. They lived happily in a beautiful brownstone near the university where Michael taught. Sarah worked part-time at a local art gallery, more for the joy of it than necessity. She had access to her trust fund, but they rarely touched it except for emergencies. I want the children to understand the value of things, Sarah would say when Michael suggested they could afford something nicer. I don't want them to grow up thinking money solves everything. The Harringtons visited occasionally, always with subtle criticism disguised as concern. The house wasn't prestigious enough. Michael's position wasn't advancing quickly enough. The children should be in private school. Sarah deflected their comments with grace, but Michael could see the strain it caused her. When the twins were 8, Sarah found the tumor. She said nothing for weeks, hoping it would be nothing, but Michael noticed her distraction during their evening walks through the neighborhood. He noticed how she held her left arm differently, how she paused longer than usual when climbing stairs. It's probably nothing, she said when she finally told him about the doctor's appointment. It wasn't nothing. The diagnosis was aggressive brain cancer, and despite the best medical care money could buy, the prognosis was grim. Sarah faced the treatments with the same quiet courage she brought to everything else. She made lists instructions for Michael about the children's routines, their likes and dislikes, their fears and dreams. Ethan needs logic when he's upset. Explain things clearly and he'll process it better. Lily will retreat into her art before she can talk about her feelings. Let her draw it out. During those long months of treatment, the Harringtons made their opinions clear. They wanted Sarah to come home to the estate where she could be properly cared for. They wanted the children to attend Edgewater Academy, their alma mater. They wanted Michael to accept a position at Harrington Company, something with more security and prestige. They mean well, Sarah said, after a particularly tense visit from her mother. Do they? Michael asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the small garden she had planted when they first moved in. I think they're afraid that when I'm gone, they'll lose the children too. They won't lose them, we're family. Sarah looked at him then, and something flickered in her expression, a sadness he couldn't quite interpret. Promise me something, Michael. Promise me you'll remember that you're enough. Just as you are enough. He promised, though he didn't understand why she seemed so worried about it. Sarah's health declined rapidly in the final months. She spent hours in her study writing letters and making phone calls she wouldn't discuss. Michael assumed she was handling her affairs, ensuring the children's education funds were properly managed. He was focused on being present for every moment they had left, treasuring the quiet conversations and gentle touches that would soon be memories. The day she died, holding his hand while the twins slept curled against her hospital bed, Sarah's last words were about the children. Take care of them. Help them remember that love is the only thing that lasts. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Episcopal Church, where the Harrington family had attended for generations. Victoria took charge of the arrangements, organizing a service that reflected the family's social standing more than Sarah's humble nature. Michael sat in the front pew with Ethan and Lily, watching colleagues and acquaintances file past the ornate casket, and felt utterly alone despite the crowd. In the weeks that followed, the Harringtons began their campaign of gentle pressure. They visited daily, bringing elaborate meals the children barely touched, and suggestions about practical arrangements. The house was too full of memories. The children needed stability. Michael needed support raising them alone. We're family, Victoria would say, her hand resting possessively on Lily's shoulder. We want what's best for everyone. Michael tried to be gracious. They were grieving too, and he understood their desire to feel useful. But their version of help felt increasingly like control. They criticized his parenting choices, his financial decisions, his plans for the children's future. When he mentioned keeping the twins in public school, Richard made calls to private institutions without consulting him. We can afford to give them advantages, Victoria argued when Michael protested. Sarah would have wanted that. Sarah wanted them to have a normal childhood, Michael replied, his voice remaining steady, though his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She said so many times. Sarah was sick. Victoria's voice gentled in a way that felt condescending. She wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. That night, Michael found Sarah's journal in her desk drawer. Her handwriting grew shakier as the entries progressed, but her thoughts remained clear and purposeful. She wrote about her love for him, her hopes for the children, and her growing concern about her parents' intentions. They see Michael as temporary. They think grief will make him more pliable, more willing to accept their version of what's best. They don't understand that his strength comes from his principles, not his circumstances. I pray he remembers who he is when they try to change him. Reading those words, Michael felt Sarah's presence as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. She had known this would happen. She had tried to prepare him, but he had been too focused on losing her to hear the warning. The final confrontation came on a gray October morning, 6 weeks after the funeral. Michael was making breakfast when he heard the moving truck in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, he watched Victoria directing workers toward the house. "What's happening?" Lily asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit, a gift from Sarah on her 8th birthday. "I don't know, sweetheart," Michael said, but his heart was already sinking. Victoria entered without knocking, her expression set with the kind of determination Michael had learned to fear. "We've made arrangements. The children will be more comfortable at the estate, and you'll have time to figure out your next steps." "My next steps? You can't raise them properly on a teacher's salary," Richard said, following his wife into the kitchen. The morning light through the window cast harsh shadows across his face, emphasizing the deep lines around his mouth. "Sarah's gone, Michael. The practical realities haven't changed just because we're all grieving." Lily began to cry quietly, and Ethan moved protectively to his sister's side. Michael knelt to their level, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Go pack some clothes. We're going to stay somewhere else for a while." "You don't understand." Victoria's voice rose slightly, her composure cracking. "This isn't a request. The house belongs to the Harrington Family Trust. Sarah lived here at our discretion, and that arrangement died with her." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. In all their years together, Sarah had never mentioned that the house wasn't truly theirs. She had paid the bills, handled the finances, protected him from the details that would have made him feel like a charity case. "One week," Richard said, not unkindly, but with the finality of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "That should be enough time to find somewhere appropriate." They left Michael alone with the twins and the workers, who began systematically packing their lives into boxes. Lily sat on her bed, drawing furiously in her sketchbook while tears ran down her cheeks. Ethan helped pack with the mechanical efficiency of someone in shock. "Are we going to live with Grandma and Grandpa?" Lily asked, her voice small and uncertain. Michael looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt something break inside him. "No, sweetheart, we're going to find our own place." But where, he didn't have an answer. Sarah's death had left him unprepared for practical challenges that seemed insurmountable. His professor's salary could cover rent and basic expenses, but he had no savings for deposits or moving costs. The life insurance policy would help, but it was tied up in probate. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Michael opened it to find Robert Collins, his colleague from the history department, standing on the porch with a thermos of coffee and an envelope. Robert was in his 70s, a distinguished professor emeritus who had mentored Michael when he first joined the faculty. His weathered face showed concern beneath his usual stoic expression. "Sarah contacted me 2 months ago," he said, offering the envelope. "She asked me to give you this if certain circumstances arose. I believe those circumstances have arrived." The envelope contained a key and an address on Maple Avenue. "There's a house," Robert explained. "The owner is looking for someone responsible to rent it cheap in exchange for fixing it up. It's not much, but it's got good bones and a yard for the children." Michael stared at the offering, overwhelmed by the realization that Sarah had anticipated this moment. "Why would she come to you with this?" Robert's expression softened, the lines around his eyes deepening with an old sorrow. "Because 30 years ago I lost my wife to cancer, and my in-laws tried to take my son. Sarah knew I would understand what you might face." Michael felt a rush of gratitude for his wife's foresight, mingled with grief that she had spent her final months preparing for a battle she wouldn't live to fight. "Thank you," he said, the words seeming inadequate for what Robert was offering. "Not just shelter, but understanding." Robert nodded, his hand briefly gripping Michael's shoulder. "Sarah also said to remind you of something when the time came. Sometimes the only family that matters is the one that chooses to love you." As the moving truck pulled away from the house where his children had taken their first steps and lost their first teeth, Michael made a silent promise to Sarah. He would prove that her faith in him hadn't been misplaced. He would show the twins that a man's worth wasn't measured by his bank account or his social connections. He would teach them that love indeed was the only thing that lasted. The house on Maple Street stood before them like a question mark, weathered, uncertain, but full of possibility. Michael gathered his children close and turned Emma's ring one more time before slipping it into his pocket. They were home. The eviction notice arrived on official letterhead delivered by a courier who waited while Michael signed for it with trembling hands. The formal language couldn't disguise the message they had 72 hours to vacate the premises. Michael stared at the document in the gray morning light, coffee growing cold in his cup. 6 weeks since Sarah's funeral, and the Harringtons had made their move. The notice cited breach of residency agreement and failure to maintain property standards, legal fiction designed to provide cover for what was essentially a family coup. Daddy, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Why is there a truck outside? Through the window, Michael could see the moving truck parked in their driveway like a patient predator. 2 workers sat in the cab, waiting for instructions. Victoria Harrington stood on the front lawn in her wool coat, checking her watch with the precision of a general coordinating an invasion. "We're going to be moving," Michael said, carefully setting down the notice. "Remember how we talked about adventures?" Ethan's face, so much like Sarah's in the shape of his eyes and the curve of his mouth, showed a maturity beyond his years. "Is it because of the money I heard Grandma talking to Grandpa about how we can't afford to stay here?" Michael felt a flash of anger that the children had been exposed to these adult concerns, but he kept his tone measured. "It's a bit more complicated than that, but yes, this house belongs to your grandparents, and we need to find our own place." Lily appeared beside her brother, still in her pajamas, clutching the sketchbook she had barely let out of her sight since Sarah's death. "What about Mom's garden and her studio?" The garden. Sarah had spent countless hours nurturing the small plot behind the house, teaching the twins to plant seeds and tend seedlings. Lily had helped her choose the flowers, while Ethan had been fascinated by the vegetables. It was where Sarah had felt strongest during her illness, drawing energy from the earth and sunshine. "We'll make a new garden," Michael promised, though he had no idea how he would fulfill that promise. Before either child could respond, the front door opened without ceremony. Victoria entered with the authority of ownership, followed by Richard and 2 men in expensive suits Michael didn't recognize. "Good morning," Victoria's tone suggested this was anything but good. "I trust you received the notice. We've arranged for a moving service to help with the transition." "You can't just throw us out." Michael rose to his full height, the eviction notice crumpling in his grip. "This is our home. This house belongs to the Harrington Family Trust," Richard replied, consulting a folder thick with legal documents. "Sarah had usage rights during her lifetime, but those rights weren't transferable. Surely you understood that." Michael hadn't understood that at all. Sarah had handled their finances, paid the utilities, dealt with maintenance issues. She had protected him from feeling like a dependent, and in doing so had left him vulnerable to this moment. "Where are we supposed to go?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Victoria's expression softened fractionally as she looked at her granddaughter. "Darling, you and Ethan will come home with us. Grandfather has already arranged enrollment at Edgewater Academy, and your rooms are waiting at the estate." "What about Daddy?" Ethan demanded, stepping closer to Michael's side. "Your father needs time to make proper arrangements for his future," Victoria said carefully. "He'll visit, of course." "No." The word came out sharper than Michael intended, startling everyone in the room. "We stay together. That's not negotiable." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Parker, I understand this is emotional, but you need to consider what's practical. The children have substantial trust funds that will ensure their education and security. You want what's best for them." "I am what's best for them," Michael said quietly. "I'm their father." Richard stepped forward, his voice taking on the reasonable tone of a man accustomed to getting his way through patience rather than force. "Michael, be realistic. You can't provide for them the way we can: private schools, college funds, cultural opportunities." "None of that matters if they lose their family," Michael interrupted. "We are their family," Victoria said, her composure cracking slightly. "We're their blood. You're just what?" Michael's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Victoria caught herself, but the damage was done. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Lily began to cry. Not the dramatic sobbing of a child seeking attention, but the quiet, heartbroken weeping of someone who understood that the adults had failed her. Ethan put his arm around his sister, his jaw set with determination. "We're not going anywhere without Dad." "Now see here, young man," Richard began. "No," Ethan said, his voice carrying more authority than a 10-year-old should possess. "Mom told us that families stick together no matter what. She said that's what makes them families." Michael felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. Sarah's values lived on in their children, stronger than any legal document or financial pressure. Very well, Victoria said, her mask of concern slipping to reveal something colder underneath. If that's your choice, you have until tomorrow evening to collect your personal belongings and leave. And go where? Michael asked. Victoria shrugged with studied indifference. That's hardly our concern anymore. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of packing and desperate phone calls. Michael contacted every rental agency in the city, but his salary and lack of security deposit eliminated most options. The few properties he could afford were either unsafe or unavailable immediately. Robert appeared at intervals with coffee and quiet support. He helped Lily pack her art supplies while Michael wrestled with the larger furniture. Ethan appointed himself inventory manager, creating careful lists of what they were taking and what they were leaving behind. Will we ever come back? Lily asked as they loaded the last boxes into Michael's aging sedan. Michael looked at the house where his children had learned to walk, where he and Sarah had dreamed about their future, where love had been the only currency that mattered. The garden was already showing signs of neglect, the late-season flowers drooping without Sarah's careful attention. I don't know, sweetheart, but wherever we go, we'll be together. The house on Maple Avenue looked like hope that had been abandoned and left to weather. The paint was peeling, the front steps sagged, and several windows were covered with plywood. But it had a roof, 4 walls, and rent Michael could manage if he was careful. Robert had driven them there in his practical sedan, having insisted they needed a proper escort to their new home. He produced the key from his pocket with the ceremony of someone passing on an important trust. The owner's been looking for the right tenant, he explained, someone who will see the potential instead of just the problems. Inside the house smelled of dust and abandonment. The rooms were larger than Michael had expected, with high ceilings and hardwood floors hidden beneath years of neglect. Lily walked through the empty spaces like a small ghost, her footsteps echoing in the silence. It needs work, Ethan observed with the practicality he'd inherited from both parents. It needs love, Michael corrected, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. And we've got plenty of that. They spent their first night on air mattresses in the living room, sharing a pizza Robert had insisted on buying. By lamplight, the room looked less forbidding, the shadows softer, the possibilities more apparent. Tell us about when you and Mom first moved in together. Lily requested snuggling against Michael's side. So Michael told them about the tiny apartment near the university, how they'd furnished it with hand-me-downs and yard sale finds, how Sarah had painted murals on the walls to make it feel like home. He told them about the first dinner party they'd hosted, serving spaghetti on mismatched plates to friends who became family. Were you scared? Ethan asked. Terrified, Michael admitted, but scared in a good way, like standing at the edge of something wonderful. Ethan considered this seriously. Are we scared in a good way now? Michael looked around the empty room at his children's faces illuminated by the warm glow of the lamp and felt something shift inside him. The eviction notice had been meant to break him, to force him to surrender his children to a life he couldn't provide. Instead, it had freed him from the weight of other people's expectations. Yes, he said, pulling them both close. I think we are. Outside, the wind rattled the old windows, but inside their circle of light, the Parker family began the work of building a new home from nothing but love and determination. 3 months into their new life, Michael discovered that poverty was less about not having money and more about the constant mental mathematics of survival. He could tell you the exact cost of a gallon of milk at 3 different stores, knew which day the bakery marked down day-old bread, and had memorized the bus schedule that would get him between home, the university, and his 2 part-time jobs with minimal transfers. Mornings began at 5:30 with preparation for his early classes at the university. Afternoons found him at the local museum, cataloging war artifacts for a special exhibition. Evenings were reserved for tutoring high school students in their affluent homes, where he sat at kitchen islands that cost more than his monthly rent and helped teenagers understand the historical significance of events that suddenly felt very personal. The teaching award from the university sat propped against the windowsill in his makeshift home office, a dusty corner of the living room where he graded papers by lamplight. The engraved plaque read, Michael Parker Excellence in Education 2020. Sometimes when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he would look at those words and remember who he had been before grief and circumstance had redefined his life. Ethan and Lily adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that children possess but shouldn't need to use. They enrolled at Lincoln Middle School, a public institution that bore no resemblance to the academies the Harringtons had preferred. The building was older, the resources limited, but the teachers cared deeply about their students' success. Lily struggled most with the transition. She had inherited Sarah's sensitive nature, along with her artistic talent and the chaos of their new reality manifested in her drawings. Where she had once sketched flowers and family portraits, her recent work featured dark swirling storms and houses that looked perpetually on the verge of collapse. "She's processing," explained Ms. Rivera, the school counselor, when Michael came for a conference. "Children often express their emotions through art before they can verbalize them. The important thing is that she's still creating." Ethan, meanwhile, had appointed himself the family's unofficial guardian. He walked Lily to her classes, helped her carry her art supplies, and deflected questions from curious classmates about why they had moved. At home, he insisted on helping with dinner preparation and household chores, his small face serious with self-imposed responsibility. "You don't have to take care of everything," Michael told him one evening as they repaired a loose floorboard together. "Mom said families help each other," Ethan replied, not looking up from the hammer he was wielding with careful precision. "This is how I help." Their new neighborhood was a study in contrast. Some houses were well maintained with tidy yards and fresh paint. Others, like theirs, showed the accumulated wear of deferred maintenance and economic struggle. But there was a sense of community here that had been absent from their previous life neighbors, who checked on each other, children who played in the streets without scheduled supervision, families who understood that wealth wasn't measured solely in dollars. Robert lived across town, but visited regularly with books for the children and practical advice for Michael. He appeared one Saturday with tools and lumber, insisting that the front steps couldn't wait for the landlord's attention. "People think poverty is about lacking things," he told Michael as they worked. "But it's really about lacking choices. The trick is making sure your children understand the difference." The house itself was slowly yielding to their efforts. Michael had discovered a talent for renovation that surprised him. Weekends were devoted to painting walls, fixing leaky faucets, and coaxing life back into rooms that had been neglected for too long. Lily chose colors for her bedroom, soft blues and greens that reminded her of her mother's garden. Ethan preferred practical improvements, better lighting for homework shelves for his books, a workspace where he could build the model airplanes that had become his latest passion. Their first small victory came when Michael managed to repair the front steps. He had salvaged lumber from a construction site and spent an entire Saturday measuring, cutting, and hammering. When he finished, the steps were level and sturdy, a small improvement that felt monumental. "They look like real steps now," Lily observed, testing them carefully. "They are real steps," Michael replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Built to last." That evening, as they sat on their newly repaired front porch eating ice cream cones Robert had brought over, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Not happiness exactly that seemed too ambitious, but a quiet sense of accomplishment. The financial pressure was constant but manageable. Michael's 3 jobs provided enough income to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and basic necessities. There was no money for extras, no family vacations, restaurant meals, or new clothes unless absolutely necessary. But they weren't hungry and they weren't homeless. And some days that felt like prosperity. Ms. Rivera, the school counselor at Lincoln Middle School, called one afternoon to discuss Lily's progress. "She's incredibly talented, but I'm concerned about some of her recent work. There's a sadness there that goes beyond normal childhood experiences." Michael arranged to meet with Ms. Rivera after school. She showed him Lily's portfolio, dozens of drawings that chronicled their family's journey from loss to displacement to tentative rebuilding. The progression was remarkable. Early pieces were chaotic and dark, but recent work showed emerging signs of hope. "She's working through her grief," Ms. Rivera explained. "Art is her way of making sense of change, but she might benefit from the after-school art program we're starting. It's free, and it would give her more time to develop her skills." Michael hesitated. The program ran until 6 p.m., which would mean Lily taking the bus home alone or waiting for him to finish his museum job. But the opportunity was too valuable to pass up. "We'll make it work," he decided. That night, when he told Lily about the art program, her face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen in months. Really, with real supplies and everything. Ms. Rivera says you have exceptional talent. Michael replied, his chest tight with emotion. Lily hugged him fiercely, and for a moment, Michael felt rich beyond measure. Ethan's adjustment had been quieter, but no less significant. His protective instincts had sharpened, but so had his sense of justice. When a classmate made fun of Lily's thrift store clothes, Ethan had stood up to him with words rather than fists, a maturity that impressed his teachers and worried his father in equal measure. He's carrying too much responsibility for his age, Michael confided to Robert during one of his visits. Maybe, Robert replied, watching Ethan help Lily with her homework at the kitchen table. Or maybe he's learning what real strength looks like. Sometimes children surprise us with how much they can handle when they know they're loved. As autumn settled over their neighborhood, the house on Maple Avenue began to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. Michael had planted a small garden in the backyard, nothing as elaborate as Sarah's, but enough to provide fresh vegetables and give the children a connection to the earth their mother had loved. The teaching award caught the evening light from its place on the windowsill, its bronze surface reflecting the warm glow of their simple living room. Michael looked at it and realized that excellence in education wasn't just about curriculum and test scores. It was about teaching his children that their worth wasn't determined by their circumstances, that family was built through love and commitment rather than wealth and status. They were learning those lessons together, one repaired step at a time. The phone had been ringing with increasing frequency, always the same number, always during dinner or homework time. Michael had stopped answering calls from numbers he didn't recognize, assuming they were telemarketers or debt collectors. His financial situation was precarious but stable. He didn't need reminders about bills he was already struggling to pay. But the calls persisted with a determination that eventually wore down his resistance. On a particularly exhausting Tuesday, after Ethan had asked 3 times why the phone kept ringing, Michael finally answered. "Mr. Parker, this is Rebecca Morgan, principal at Lincoln Middle School. I've been trying to reach you regarding your children." Michael's first instinct was concern. He gripped the phone tighter, scenarios of school trouble flashing through his mind. "Is everything all right? Are the children okay?" "They're fine, Mr. Parker. Quite remarkable, actually. I'd like to discuss some opportunities for them, particularly Lily. I understand your situation is complicated right now. Could we meet tomorrow during your lunch break?" The principal's office at Lincoln Middle School was cramped but welcoming, with student artwork covering most available wall space. Rebecca Morgan was in her early 50s with prematurely gray hair, cut in a practical bob, and eyes that missed nothing. She rose to greet Michael, extending a hand across her desk, cluttered with papers and a half-eaten sandwich. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Parker. I know your schedule must be demanding." "What's this about my children?" Michael asked, too tired for pleasantries. "Direct. I appreciate that." She sat back down, folding her hands on the desk. "I'll be equally direct. Your daughter Lily has extraordinary artistic talent. Her art teacher showed me her portfolio yesterday. There's depth and emotional intelligence in her work that's rare in children twice her age." Michael felt a surge of pride tempered with wariness. Praise for his children often came with expectations he couldn't meet. "And Ethan, your son's math scores are the highest we've seen in 5 years. He's also showing leadership qualities well beyond his years." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Parker, Lincoln may not have the resources of private schools, but we do have specialized programs for exceptional students. The arts program meets after school 3 days a week. The advanced mathematics track meets during regular hours. I'd like to recommend both children for these opportunities." "That's very kind, but I'm not sure how we'd manage the logistics." "My schedule." "I'm aware of your situation, Mr. Parker." Rebecca's tone softened, but her gaze remained direct. "The Harringtons have made some inquiries about the children's well-being. Rather persistent inquiries." Michael felt his shoulders tense. So it had begun already, the campaign to prove him an unfit parent. "We also have an after-school program until 6:00 p.m. Many of our faculty volunteer their time. The children would be supervised, receive a healthy snack, and have access to our facilities. There would be no cost to you." Michael studied the principal carefully, searching for the hidden agenda he'd come to expect from people offering help. "Why would you do this?" Rebecca's expression changed, a shadow of old pain, briefly visible before her professional demeanor returned. 20 years ago, I lost my husband unexpectedly. I had two young children in a teaching position that barely covered our expenses. Someone extended a hand when I needed it most. I'm simply paying it forward, Mr. Parker. The honesty in her voice resonated with something in Michael. For the first time in months, he felt seen not as a charity case or an inadequate father, but as a person doing his best in impossible circumstances. Thank you. We'd be grateful for the opportunity. Good. Now there's something else you should know. A woman named Margaret Wilson has been volunteering in our library twice a week. She lives on Maple Avenue, 3 houses down from you. She's offered to walk the children home on days when you're working late. She's a retired teacher, background checked and well respected in the community. I don't know her. If she knows you or of you, Sarah was one of her students years ago, elementary school, I believe. The mention of Sarah sent a jolt through Michael, a connection to his wife's past here in this unexpected place. Sarah never mentioned a Margaret Wilson. Margaret says Sarah used to stay after school to paint, said she had the most extraordinary eye for color she'd ever seen in a child. She recognized Lily's work immediately, said the talent runs in the family. That evening, Michael sat on the front steps watching Ethan and Lily play a complex game of their own invention in the front yard. The autumn air carried a crispness that hinted at the coming winter, a season he was dreading in their drafty house, with its inadequate heating system. The sound of footsteps on the sidewalk drew his attention. An elderly woman approached, her silver hair, neatly styled, her posture still straight despite her years. She carried a covered dish and moved with the confident stride of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms. Mr. Parker, I'm Margaret Wilson. I believe Rebecca Morgan mentioned I might stop by. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, but there was a sharpness to her gaze that suggested she missed very little. She did. Please call me Michael. Then you must call me Margaret. She offered the dish. I brought dinner, my mother's chicken and dumplings recipe. Feeds an army or two, growing children and their father. The children approached cautiously, sizing up this new presence in their carefully guarded world. Did you really know our mom when she was little? Lily asked, direct as always. I did indeed. She was about your age when she came to my art class for the first time. She painted a blue bird that was so realistic, I thought it might fly right off the page. Was she good at math too? Ethan asked, not to be outdone. Margaret laughed, a warm sound that seemed to make the chilly evening less forbidding. She was determined, which is more important than being naturally good. She worked harder than anyone to understand fractions. Said she needed to know them properly to mix her paints. As they sat around the kitchen table eating Margaret's chicken and dumplings, Michael felt something loosen in his chest, the constant vigilance of solo parenting, the fear of failing his children, the bone-deep exhaustion. None of it disappeared, but for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt the possibility that they wouldn't have to face everything alone. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Margaret helped Michael wash the dishes, her movements efficient and practiced. Sarah was special, you know, not just her talent, but her heart. When the other children were cruel to the janitor's son, making fun of his clothes, excluding him from games, Sarah was the one who sat with him at lunch, drew portraits of him looking heroic like a knight or an astronaut, gave him one every Friday until the other children had started seeing him differently. Michael leaned against the counter, the damp dish towel forgotten in his hands. That sounds like Sarah. Margaret dried her hands, her expression thoughtful. She told me once, years later, when she came back to visit, that her grandmother had taught her something important. Real power isn't in what you have, but in what you choose to give away. The Harringtons never understood that about her. They saw her generosity as weakness, her compassion as naivete. They were wrong. It was her greatest strength. As Margaret prepared to leave, she paused at the door. This neighborhood looks after its own, Michael. You'll find that out soon enough. We may not have much individually, but together we make do. The Santos family 2 doors down. Gabriel's boy Miguel is Ethan's age. The Kims at the corner store will put things on credit if you're ever in a tight spot. And I'm just 3 houses away if you need anything at all. Thank you for dinner and for remembering her. Margaret's eyes softened. How could anyone forget Sarah? She burned so bright. The following Saturday morning brought the sound of vehicles pulling up outside the house. Michael opened the front door to find Robert Collins directing a small army of people unloading tools and supplies from pickup trucks and cars. What's going on? Maple Avenue Neighborhood Association's Fall Fix-Up Day. Robert gestured to the assorted group gathering on the lawn, an eclectic mix of ages and backgrounds, all wearing work clothes and determined expressions. Every year we choose one house that needs a little extra attention before winter sets in. This year it's yours. A tall, muscular man in his 30s approached, wiping his hands on well-worn jeans before extending one to Michael. Gabriel Santos. I'm a contractor when there's work, handyman when there isn't. That's my boy, Miguel, with your son. We're going to tackle that roof today. Can't have you freezing when the snow comes. Before Michael could formulate a response, a petite Asian woman in her 60s joined them carrying a large thermos. Mrs. Kim from the corner store, I bring coffee now, lunch later. My husband is checking your furnace. He fix anything with motor. Michael was overwhelmed by the generosity of these strangers who were treating his family's well-being as a community responsibility. I can't possibly repay. Gabriel cut him off with a friendly wave. No one's keeping score, Professor. My roof leaked for 2 winters before I could afford to fix it. The Wilsons' porch was rebuilt by volunteers after the big storm 3 years ago. We take care of each other here because someday it might be any one of us needing the help. By sundown, the house on Maple Avenue had a patched roof, repaired gutters, sealed windows, and a functioning heating system. The front steps had been rebuilt, the porch railing secured, and the yard cleared of debris. Inside, the drafty spots had been identified and insulated, the plumbing fixed, and the electrical system checked for safety. As everyone gathered in the backyard for Mrs. Kim's promised lunch, now dinner, Michael found himself surrounded by neighbors who had become allies in a single day. They traded stories over paper plates laden with food, shared local knowledge about which schools had the best programs and which officials could be counted on to actually fix the potholes, debated the merits of various home repair techniques with the good-natured arguing of people who respected each other's opinions. Standing slightly apart from the group, watching his children integrate seamlessly into this new social circle, Michael was joined by Margaret. This is what community looks like, Michael. Not the formal dinner parties and charity galas the Harringtons attend, but people rolling up their sleeves and diving in when someone needs help. Sarah would have loved this. She would indeed, and she'd want you to accept it without feeling like you're taking charity. There's dignity in being part of something larger than yourself. As the weeks passed, Michael found himself more exhausted than he'd ever been in his life. The constant juggling of 3 jobs, the pressure of keeping up with bills, the physical demands of renovating the house, and the emotional labor of helping 2 grieving children adapt to their new reality, it all took a toll he couldn't afford to acknowledge. Late one night, after the children were asleep, he sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and grading that needed his attention. His vision blurred with fatigue, and for the first time since they'd moved in, he allowed himself to question whether he could really do this. Whether Sarah had been wrong to believe in him so completely. Whether the Harringtons might have been right that the children deserved better than what he could provide. The doubts settled over him like a physical weight, pressing him down until his head rested on his arms, papers crumpling beneath him. He didn't mean to sleep, but exhaustion claimed him anyway, pulling him into restless dreams where Sarah was always just out of reach, trying to tell him something he couldn't quite hear. He woke with a start to the sound of movement in the kitchen. Lily stood by the stove, carefully heating milk in a sauce pot, while Ethan measured cocoa powder into mugs. What are you 2 doing up? Michael asked, his voice rough with sleep. It's the middle of the night. You were having a bad dream, Lily said matter-of-factly. You kept saying Mom's name. And you looked cold, Ethan added. Mom always made hot chocolate when someone was sad or cold. Michael looked at his children, this little girl with her mother's artist's eye, an empathetic heart, this boy with his practical solutions and protective nature, and felt something shift inside him. They were not burdens to be carried, but partners in this journey. They were not just surviving their loss. They were helping each other through it. I think this is the best hot chocolate I've ever had, he said a few minutes later, sipping from the slightly too sweet concoction they prepared. It's because we made it with love, Lily said solemnly. Mom always said that was the secret ingredient. Michael pulled them both close. She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. Later, after he tucked them back into bed, Michael returned to the kitchen table. The bills and grading still waited, but somehow the task seemed less overwhelming. Sarah had believed he could do this. His children believed it too. Maybe it was time he started believing it himself. 6 months after moving to Maple Street, Michael found Lily's art supplies hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. The wooden box was lacquered mahogany, expensive and elegant, with Lily Elizabeth Parker engraved on a small brass plate. Inside, nestled in custom-fitted compartments, were professional-grade watercolors, charcoal pencils, and brushes that cost more than Michael spent on groceries in a week. Mom bought them for me, Lily explained when he asked, her voice small with worry. She said they were for when I was ready to create something important. I was saving them. Michael lifted out a tube of ultramarine blue, feeling its weight and quality. Sarah had chosen each item, carefully investing in tools that would last a lifetime. The gesture was so typical of his wife, planning for a future she wouldn't see, ensuring their daughter would have what she needed to pursue her dreams. I think you're ready now, he said gently. Mom would want you to use them. That afternoon, Lily set up her easel in the backyard and began to paint. Her first piece was tentative, a simple landscape of their street with its modest houses and towering maple trees. But as the days passed, her confidence grew. She painted their house before and after Michael's renovations, capturing the transformation from neglect to care. She painted Ethan building a birdhouse, his tongue poking out in concentration. She painted Michael reading on the front porch, looking peaceful in a way that surprised him. The art supplies became a bridge between Lily's past and present, a tangible reminder that some gifts transcended loss. When she worked with them, she spoke to her mother, quiet conversations about color choices and composition that Michael pretended not to overhear. Ethan's adaptation had taken a different form. He had discovered the neighborhood's informal network of boys who traded baseball cards, built tree forts, and engaged in elaborate games of capture the flag that spanned multiple yards. For the first time since Sarah's death, he was acting like a typical 10-year-old rather than a miniature adult. Michael watched from the kitchen window as Ethan played catch with Miguel Santos, who lived 3 houses down. The boys' laughter carried on the evening air, a sound Michael had worried he might never hear again. He's making friends, Robert observed, joining Michael at the window with 2 cups of coffee. He had taken to stopping by most evenings, ostensibly to check on their progress with the house, but really because he enjoyed their company as much as they enjoyed his. I was starting to worry he'd forgotten how to be a kid, Michael admitted. Children are resilient, but they need permission to heal. Sounds like you're all giving each other that permission. The phone had been ringing with increasing frequency, always the same number, always during dinner or homework time. Michael had stopped answering calls from numbers he didn't recognize, assuming they were telemarketers or debt collectors. His financial situation was precarious, but stable. He didn't need reminders about bills he was already struggling to pay. But the calls persisted with a determination that eventually wore down his resistance. On a particularly exhausting Tuesday, after Ethan had asked 3 times why the phone kept ringing, Michael finally answered. Mr. Parker, this is Elizabeth Bennett from Caldwell Bishop and Associates. I've been trying to reach you regarding an important legal matter concerning your late wife, Sarah Parker. Michael's grip tightened on the phone. What sort of legal matter? I'd prefer not to discuss the details over the phone. Would you be available to meet at our offices tomorrow morning, say 900 room? I have classes until noon. I understand. Would 400 work? It's imperative that we speak as soon as possible, Mr. Parker. This concerns matters with significant time sensitivity. The law offices of Caldwell Bishop and Associates occupied the middle floors of a downtown high-rise, neither as opulent as the top-floor firms catering to the city's elite, nor as utilitarian as the storefront practices serving working-class clients. The reception area featured muted colors, comfortable but not luxurious furniture, and discreetly framed diplomas and certifications. Elizabeth Bennett was younger than Michael had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested efficiency rather than warmth. She greeted him with a firm handshake and led him to a conference room where several folders were arranged neatly on the polished table. Thank you for coming, Mr. Parker. I appreciate your promptness given your challenging schedule. You said this concerns my late wife. Elizabeth nodded, opening the top folder with practiced precision. Yes, I represent the Campbell Trust, a private foundation established by your wife's maternal grandmother, Margaret Campbell. Are you familiar with Mrs. Campbell? Michael thought carefully. Sarah spoke of her grandmother often, but I never met her. She passed away before Sarah and I met. Did Sarah ever discuss her grandmother's financial legacy? Michael remembered snippets of conversations, the journal entry he'd read just the night before. She mentioned that her grandmother had views about money that differed from the Harringtons, that she believed in using wealth purposefully rather than accumulating it for its own sake. But she never discussed specific inheritances or trusts. Elizabeth made a note in her folder, her expression revealing nothing. Mrs. Campbell established the trust in 1980 with explicit instructions regarding its management and eventual distribution. The principle was to remain untouched until certain conditions were met. Sarah was named as the primary beneficiary upon reaching the age of 30, provided she demonstrated what Mrs. Campbell termed a life of purpose and compassion. Michael leaned forward, his interest piqued. And did she meet the conditions, I mean? Elizabeth allowed a small smile. According to the trustee's evaluation, yes, Sarah was notified of her inheritance on her 30th birthday 3 years ago. The trust, valued at approximately $195 million, was placed under her sole control at that time. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He stared at Elizabeth, certain he had misheard. That's impossible. Sarah never mentioned anything about that kind of money. We lived on my professor's salary and her part-time gallery work. We budgeted for vacations, saved for the children's education. If she had access to that kind of wealth, she chose not to use it for day-to-day expenses. According to our records, Sarah established the Parker Foundation immediately after gaining control of the trust. She directed that the funds be used primarily for philanthropic purposes, with specific provisions for educational initiatives, community development, and healthcare access for underserved populations. Michael struggled to reconcile this information with the life they had lived together. Sarah secretly controlling a fortune while they clipped coupons and bought clothes on sale. Sarah establishing a foundation he'd never heard of, making decisions about millions of dollars without ever mentioning it to him. Why wouldn't she tell me? Elizabeth consulted another document, her expression softening slightly. That's where matters become more personal, Mr. Parker. Sarah left specific instructions regarding disclosure of the foundation and its assets. According to her directives, you were to be informed of its existence exactly 1 year after her death, provided certain conditions were met. What conditions? Separation from the Harrington family's influence, establishment of an independent household, demonstration of, and I'm quoting directly from her instructions, continued commitment to the values we shared throughout our marriage, particularly regarding the children's upbringing. The realization dawned slowly then, all at once. Sarah had anticipated everything: her parents' attempt to control the children, Michael's displacement from their home, the financial struggles that would follow. She had orchestrated a test, a proving ground for the principles they had built their marriage upon. She knew this would happen. She knew her parents would try to take the children, that they'd use money as leverage. Elizabeth nodded. Based on my conversations with Sarah during the establishment of the foundation, yes. She was concerned that her parents' wealth would influence the children's values if they were raised in the Harrington household. She was equally concerned that you might compromise your principles if offered financial security in exchange for certain concessions regarding their upbringing. Anger flared briefly in Michael's chest, anger that Sarah had kept such secrets, that she had orchestrated this elaborate test without his knowledge or consent. But the anger faded as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a deeper understanding of the woman he had loved. Sarah, who had grown up witnessing the corrosive effects of unearned wealth and privilege. Sarah, who had chosen a life of purpose and meaning over one of luxury and ease. Sarah, who had wanted to ensure that their children would inherit values, not just money. What happens now? Elizabeth opened another folder, revealing a document bearing Sarah's familiar signature. Now, as the surviving parent and legal guardian of Ethan and Lily Parker, you become the primary trustee of the Parker Foundation. Sarah specified that the children would become co-trustees upon reaching the age of 21, assuming they demonstrate the same values the foundation was established to promote. Until then, all decisions regarding the management and distribution of assets rest with you. Michael ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the responsibility Sarah had entrusted to him. I don't know anything about running a foundation. I'm a history professor, not a financial manager. The foundation has a professional management team in place with clear guidelines established by Sarah. Your role would be oversight and direction, ensuring that the foundation's activities align with its stated mission. Additionally, there are provisions for your family's financial security, a modest but comfortable stipend to cover living expenses, educational costs for the children, and healthcare needs. And the Harringtons, do they know about this? Elizabeth's expression turned carefully neutral. The Harringtons are aware of Mrs. Campbell's trust. They were explicitly excluded from any control or influence over its assets by the terms of Mrs. Campbell's will. However, they are not aware of Sarah's specific directives regarding the Parker Foundation or the timing of your appointment as trustee. I need time to process this. Of course, these documents outline the Foundation's current activities, assets, and legal structure. I'd encourage you to review them at your convenience. There's no immediate deadline for your formal acceptance of the trustee position, though there are quarterly distributions scheduled that would benefit from your input. As Michael left the law office, the city streets seemed altered, somehow, as if he were seeing them through a different lens. The weight of Sarah's revelation pressed against his chest, a complex mixture of gratitude, betrayal, and disbelief. He had lived the past year in a state of near-constant financial anxiety, working 3 jobs to keep their heads above water. While a fortune waited in trust, its revelation depended on his adherence to principles he would have maintained regardless. Back at the house on Maple Avenue, Michael found Margaret sitting on the front porch with Lily, who was sketching the winter sunset with fierce concentration. Ethan was helping Gabriel Santos build a snowman in the yard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Margaret observed as Michael approached. "Something like that. The children are fine. Homework's done, dinner's warming in the oven, and Gabriel's boy is staying for supper, if that's all right with you." Michael nodded absently, his mind still reeling from Elizabeth Bennet's revelations. "Thank you for watching them. For everything." Margaret studied him with a perceptive gaze that had assessed generations of children. "Whatever's troubling you, remember that burdens shared are burdens halved. When you're ready to talk, I'm a good listener." After dinner with the children, occupied with board games in the living room, Michael retreated to the kitchen where Margaret was washing dishes, despite his protest that he could handle it. "Sarah left us money," he said abruptly without preamble. Margaret's hands stilled in the soapy water, but she didn't turn around. "Her grandmother's trust. You knew not specifics, but Sarah mentioned that her grandmother had left her something significant separate from the Harrington fortune. Said it was important to her that the money be used as her grandmother intended, not absorbed into the Harrington empire. Why wouldn't she tell me we were married? We shared everything. Or I thought we did." Margaret dried her hands and turned to face him, her expression compassionate but firm. "Did you share everything? Did you tell Sarah about your nightmares after your father died? About how you blamed yourself for not being there when he had the heart attack? About how you pushed yourself to achieve academically because you thought it would somehow make up for failing him?" Michael stared at her, shocked. "How could you possibly know about that?" "Sarah told me. She worried about you, about how you carried that burden alone even though she knew all about it. She said you thought you were protecting her by not talking about your pain, but really you were protecting yourself from being vulnerable." The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Michael had indeed kept certain aspects of his grief private, believing he was shielding Sarah from additional worries during her illness. That's different. Is it Sarah grew up watching money destroy what mattered most? Her parents used wealth as a weapon, a tool for control and manipulation. Her grandmother showed her a different way, that money could be a force for good when wielded with compassion and clear purpose. Sarah wanted to protect what mattered most to her, you the children, the values you shared. Maybe keeping the trust separate was her way of ensuring those values wouldn't be compromised. Michael sank into a kitchen chair, the events of the day catching up with him in a wave of exhaustion. "There's so much money, Margaret. Millions. We could have used it for her treatment, for specialists, for experimental therapies. And you think she didn't consider that Sarah was practical as well as idealistic? If she believed additional treatments wouldn't change the outcome, she'd make the choice that aligned with her values, leaving a legacy that would benefit many, rather than extending her life by weeks or months at enormous cost. She left me in charge of it all, a foundation, philanthropic initiatives, everything. I don't know the first thing about managing that kind of wealth." Margaret's eyes crinkled with amusement. "And you think Sarah didn't know that she chose you as trustee because of your character, not your financial expertise? She trusted your judgment, your integrity, your commitment to the principles you shared. The rest is just logistics. Hire good people. Listen to sound advice. Stay true to the mission. The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Michael answered to find Richard Harrington on the line, his voice carrying the forced joviality of someone with an agenda. "Michael, good evening. I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." "We finished, actually." "What can I do for you, Richard?" "I've been thinking about our last conversation and realize we may have been hasty in our approach. Victoria and I would like to discuss a compromise regarding the children's education and living arrangements. Perhaps you could bring Ethan and Lily to the house this Sunday for lunch." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. The timing was too convenient, coming just hours after his meeting with Elizabeth Bennet. Had the Harringtons somehow learned about Sarah's trust? Were they trying to reestablish influence now that they suspected his financial situation had changed? "I appreciate the invitation, Richard, but we have plans this weekend. The children are participating in a community service project with their school." "I see. Another time, perhaps. How are they adjusting to their new circumstances?" "They're thriving, actually. Ethan's on the math team and Lily's artwork was selected for a special exhibition at the community center. They've made friends, joined activities, become part of the neighborhood." "How nice. Well, do give them our love. And Michael, our offer still stands. Should you reconsider the children's educational options? Edgewater Academy has an excellent scholarship program." The implication was clear. The Harringtons still believed Michael couldn't afford quality education for his children, and they were positioning themselves as benevolent providers of opportunities he couldn't supply. "I'll keep that in mind. Good night, Richard." After hanging up, Michael turned to find Margaret watching him with a knowing expression. The Harringtons making overtures, attempting to reestablish contact. "Yes, I wonder if they've somehow heard about the trust." "It's possible. Money talks in the financial world is smaller than you might think. If they have, it explains the sudden interest in reconciliation." Michael shook his head, a newfound determination settling over him. "It doesn't matter. Nothing's changed. We're building a life here, a good life, based on real connections and genuine community. The money doesn't change who we are or what matters most." Margaret smiled, a warm, approving expression that reminded Michael of his own mother. "And that Michael Parker is exactly why Sarah chose you to carry on her legacy." That night, after the house had quieted, Michael found himself drawn to the small box in his nightstand where he kept Sarah's most personal effects. Her wedding ring, the last birthday card she had given him, the hospital bracelet she had worn during her final days. Among these treasures was a sealed envelope he had never opened, marked simply, "For when you must choose." With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the single page covered in Sarah's handwriting, steadier than her final journal entries. This had been written earlier, when her mind was clear and her hand still strong. "My dearest Michael, if you're reading this, you're facing a difficult decision about our children's future. I can't know exactly what the choice entails, but I know my parents well enough to predict they'll offer something that seems reasonable, practical, advantageous, with strings attached that may not be immediately visible. Here is what I want for Ethan and Lily. I want them to grow up knowing their value isn't determined by their bank account or social connections. I want them to recognize genuine kindness and distinguish it from manipulation. I want them to understand that integrity sometimes requires sacrificing convenience or advantage. I want them to see that real community isn't built on transactions, but on mutual care and commitment. These lessons rarely come from prestigious institutions or exclusive social circles. They come from watching the adults they love make difficult choices based on principle rather than convenience. They come from experiencing both struggle and support, from knowing what it means to work for something meaningful, from seeing firsthand that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased at any price. Trust yourself, Michael. You know our children. You know what matters most. The path that seems most practical may not be the one that leads them toward becoming the people we hope they would be. Remember what you said to me when my parents offered you that position at Harrington Company. Some costs don't appear on the balance sheet. You were right then. I suspect you are right now, too. All my loved ones, Sora." The letter brought both clarity and comfort. Sarah had anticipated this moment, understood the choice he would face, and trusted his judgment. She had seen in him something he sometimes doubted in himself, the courage to choose the harder path when it aligned with their deepest values. The following morning, Michael gathered Ethan and Lily in the living room before school. The winter sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor as he explained in age-appropriate terms their grandparents' proposal. "So we go to fancy school but still live here," Ethan clarified, his analytical mind immediately grasping the practical aspects. "Yes, and you'd spend one weekend each month with your grandparents at their house." Lily's expression grew troubled, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "Would we have to go alone without you?" "That would be the arrangement, yes." The children exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that had developed between them since Sarah's death. "I don't want to go to a different school," Ethan said finally. "I like Lincoln. My friends are there. And the math team." "Me too," Lily agreed. "Ms. Rivera says I can be in the special art program next year if I keep improving. And grandmother always makes me feel like I'm doing everything wrong." The simplicity of their responses, untainted by consideration of long-term advantages or social prestige, cut through the complexity that had been clouding Michael's thinking. While he had been weighing educational opportunities against family values, the children were evaluating the proposal based on what actually contributed to their happiness and well-being. "What if Grandma and Grandpa get mad if we say no?" Lily asked, her voice small with worry. Michael pulled his children close, their small bodies warm against his sides. "That's for me to handle, not you. Your job is to be honest about what you want and how you feel. My job is to make the decision that's best for our family and deal with the consequences." Later that morning, Michael called Elizabeth Bennett to discuss the legal implications of declining the Harringtons' offer. The conversation was sobering. While the Harringtons' case for grandparent visitation wasn't guaranteed success, the litigation would be lengthy, expensive, and potentially damaging to the children's emotional well-being. In most states, grandparents need to prove that visitation is in the children's best interest and that denial would cause them harm, Elizabeth explained. The Harringtons would likely argue that depriving Ethan and Lily of their cultural heritage, family connections, and the educational opportunities they can provide constitutes harm. Would they succeed? It's difficult to predict. Courts generally presume that parents act in their children's best interest, but the Harringtons have resources to present a compelling case. They could bring in experts to testify about the advantages of their involvement, perhaps even suggest that your rejection of their reasonable offer demonstrates a pattern of alienation that isn't serving the children well. Michael rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. What if I counteroffer perhaps supervised visits here rather than weekends at the estate? That might strengthen your position. It shows willingness to maintain the family connection while protecting the children's stability and routine. Courts generally favor compromise over complete estrangement when it comes to extended family relationships. The conversation confirmed what Michael had already suspected, that declining the Harringtons' offer outright would trigger a legal battle that would drain his energy and resources regardless of the foundation's financial support. A counterproposal might provide a middle path, one that maintained boundaries while avoiding unnecessary conflict. That afternoon, Michael arranged to meet Victoria at a neutral location, a quiet tea room downtown that offered privacy without the power dynamics of either home territory. Victoria arrived precisely on time, dressed in understated elegance that still managed to convey wealth and status. "Thank you for meeting me, Victoria. I've given your proposal careful consideration." And the word hung between them. Victoria's tone carefully neutral, though her eyes betrayed her tension. "I can't accept it as offered. The children are thriving in their current school environment with friends and activities that provide stability during a difficult time. Uprooting them to attend Edgewater, regardless of its academic advantages, would disrupt the social connections that have helped them process their grief." Victoria's lips thinned with disappointment, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "However, I recognize the importance of maintaining their relationship with you and Richard. I propose an alternative monthly family dinners at our home on Maple Avenue, where you can spend time with Ethan and Lily in their environment. And occasional day visits to the estate, perhaps once every 2 months, with me present, at least initially. As the children become more comfortable, we can reevaluate the arrangement." Victoria studied him carefully, weighing his counteroffer against her expectations. And their education, Lincoln Middle School, hardly prepares them for the opportunities their heritage should afford them. The Parker Foundation can fund enrichment activities beyond what Lincoln offers: private music lessons, advanced art instruction for Lily, additional math and science programs for Ethan. They get the educational enhancement without sacrificing the community that's helped them heal. Victoria's expression revealed her internal calculation, how much to concede, how much to demand, where the true priorities lay in this negotiation. Richard won't be satisfied with such limited access to the children. He had hoped to begin introducing Ethan to the family business to prepare him for eventually taking his place in the Harrington legacy. Ethan is 10 years old, Victoria. He deserves a childhood before being groomed as Richard's successor. If when he's older he expresses interest in the family business, that would be his choice to make. But I won't commit him to a path before he's old enough to understand what it means. The implication was clear. Michael wouldn't sacrifice his son's autonomy to fulfill Richard's dynastic ambitions. The boundary was non-negotiable. Victoria sipped her tea, buying time to recalibrate her approach. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of genuine curiosity beneath the practiced poise. You truly believe this modest life you've created is better for them than what we can provide? The connections, the opportunities, the security. I believe what matters most isn't what we give our children, but what we teach them. Ethan and Lily are learning resilience community, the value of hard work, and the importance of genuine relationships. Those lessons will serve them better than any social connection or financial advantage. Sarah said something similar once. Victoria admitted a rare moment of vulnerability breaking through her composed exterior. When she refused the position Richard arranged at the gallery, she said she'd rather earn her place through merit than receive it through nepotism. I thought it was youthful idealism that she'd outgrow. I never understood it was a fundamental difference in values. Michael saw in opening a chance to bridge the chasm of understanding that had separated Sarah from her parents and now threatened to extend to the next generation. Sarah loved you, Victoria. She was grateful for the privileges she had growing up. But she wanted to define success on her own terms, to build a life based on meaning rather than status. That's the legacy she wanted for Ethan and Lily, the freedom to determine their own values rather than inheriting them without question. For a moment, Victoria's carefully maintained facade faltered, revealing the grief she typically kept hidden beneath layers of control and composure. I miss her every day. The children are all we have left of her. They're not extensions of Sarah Victoria. They're their own people with their own paths to discover. Loving them means supporting who they are becoming, not just preserving who they remind you of. The truth of the statement hung between them, uncomfortable but necessary. Victoria straightened her shoulders, her moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it had appeared. I'll discuss your counter-proposal with Richard. I make no promises about his receptiveness, but I will advocate for giving it serious consideration. As Victoria gathered her belongings to leave, she paused, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. One question, Michael. If the foundation hadn't existed, if you were truly struggling financially as we believed, would your decision be different? Michael considered the question, honestly understanding its importance. The financial security changes our practical circumstances, but not our values. Even without the foundation, I would prioritize the children's emotional well-being over educational prestige or social advantage. Money or the lack of it doesn't determine what matters most. Victoria nodded, accepting his answer with unexpected grace. Sarah chose well. The simple statement, the closest thing to approval Victoria had ever offered, lingered in the air as she departed, leaving Michael with the sense that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. Not resolution, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The following weeks brought a tentative new pattern to their lives. The Harringtons accepted Michael's counter-proposal, albeit with evident reluctance on Richard's part. The first family dinner at the Maple Avenue house was awkward. Victoria clearly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings, Richard struggling to connect with grandchildren who remained wary of his formal manner. But as the evening progressed, small moments of genuine connection emerged. Richard discovered Ethan's fascination with architecture and shared stories about historic buildings he had helped preserve through his real estate developments. Victoria watched Lily sketch and offered gentle observations about composition and perspective that revealed her own hidden appreciation for art. By the third such dinner a month later, the initial stiffness had given way to something resembling comfortable familiarity. The children approached their grandparents with less caution. Ethan proudly showing Richard his math competition medals, Lily seeking Victoria's opinion on her latest paintings. The Harringtons, in turn, made visible efforts to engage with the children on their terms, rather than imposing expectations or judgments. The first-day visit to the Harrington estate revealed similar progress. Though initially overwhelmed by the mansion's grandeur, Ethan and Lily gradually relaxed as Michael remained steadily present, a buffer against old tensions and unspoken expectations. Richard gave them a tour of the grounds, showing particular patience with Lily's endless questions about the garden. Victoria had arranged a small art exhibition in the conservatory, not of valuable masterpieces from their collection, but of Sarah's childhood drawings and paintings preserved with the same care as their most expensive acquisitions. She was talented even then, Victoria said softly as they studied a watercolor Sarah had painted at 12, a simple scene of the estate's garden in spring, rendered with surprising skill for such a young artist. Lily has her eye for detail, Michael agreed, watching his daughter examine her mother's work on with intense concentration. And her determination, Victoria added a note of pride warming her typically modulated voice. Sarah would paint the same subject dozens of times until she captured it exactly as she saw it in her mind. Lily has that same persistence. The acknowledgement that Sarah's positive qualities lived on in her children seemed to ease something in Victoria. For perhaps the first time she was seeing Ethan and Lily not just as extensions of the Harrington legacy or reminders of her lost daughter, but as individuals with their own unique combinations of inherited traits and developing personalities. As winter gave way to spring, the Parker Foundation began taking more concrete shape under Michael's guidance. With Elizabeth Bennett's help, he established clear priorities aligned with Sarah's values. Educational access for underserved communities, arts programs for disadvantaged youth, community development initiatives that emphasize self-determination rather than dependency. The Foundation's first major grant funded a comprehensive after-school program at Lincoln Middle School, providing resources that benefited not just Ethan and Lily, but all their classmates. Michael found unexpected satisfaction in this work, applying the same careful thought to philanthropy that he brought to his teaching and parenting. The house on Maple Avenue blossomed along with the season. The garden Michael had started the previous year expanded with Margaret's expert guidance and the children's enthusiastic assistance. The interior renovations continued room by room, each improvement making the space more truly their own. The neighborhood's collective efforts had transformed what was once a neglected property into a warm, welcoming home that reflected the family's journey from crisis to recovery. One evening in late April, as Michael sat on the front porch watching Ethan and Lily play with neighborhood friends in the yard, Robert Collins joined him, settling into the adjacent chair with the careful movements of advancing age. "You've built something remarkable here, Michael. Not just the house, but the life inside it." Michael smiled, watching his son teach Miguel Santos the finer points of pitching a baseball, while Lily and several other children created an elaborate chalk mural on the sidewalk. "We built it together, the children, the neighbors' friends like you and Margaret. I couldn't have done it alone." That's precisely what makes it remarkable. The Harringtons measure success by individual achievement. Wealth accumulated, status, attained power, exercised. You measure it by connection, community, shared purpose. The children are learning that lesson every day, not through lectures, but through lived experience. The observation resonated with something Michael had been reflecting on recently: the profound difference between knowing principles intellectually and embodying them through action. Ethan and Lily weren't just hearing about values like generosity, resilience, and community. They were witnessing them in practice and participating in their expression. "Do you think Sarah would be proud of what we've created here?" Robert's weathered face softened with certainty. "Without question, this is exactly what she hoped for. Not just material security, but a life rich in meaning and connection. The foundation provides resources, but the true inheritance she left her children is the example you're setting together, that a good life isn't measured by what you have, but by who you become and how you care for others." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black car, different from the Harringtons' usual vehicle. A young man in a driver's uniform emerged, approached the porch, and handed Michael an envelope, before returning to the car without a word. Inside was a formal invitation to a charity gala hosted by the Harrington Foundation, along with a handwritten note from Victoria. "We would be honored if you and the children would attend as our guests. This is an important event for the family, and your presence would mean a great deal to us." Perhaps it's time the community met Sarah's family, as it truly is not divided by grief and misunderstanding, but united in her memory. The invitation represented more than a social engagement. It was Victoria's public acknowledgement of Michael and the children as legitimate members of the Harrington family circle. After months of gradual relationship building through private dinners and visits, she was offering formal recognition in the social world she valued most highly. "I wasn't expecting this," Michael admitted, showing the invitation to Robert. The older man studied it thoughtfully. "It's a significant gesture. Victoria is essentially declaring to her entire social circle that you and the children are acknowledged family members, not estranged relations to be hidden away. Should we accept? That depends on what you want the children to learn from the experience. There's value in understanding the world the Harringtons inhabit, even if it's not the world you choose to center your lives around. Knowledge without judgment, exposure without absorption. These can broaden perspective without compromising values." And the gala was held at the city's most prestigious hotel. The grand ballroom had been transformed into an elegant showcase of wealth and influence. Michael felt distinctly out of place despite his rented tuxedo, but Ethan and Lily approached the event with the natural adaptability of children curious about the unfamiliar surroundings, but grounded in their own sense of self. Victoria met them in the lobby, her expression showing genuine pleasure at their arrival. "You all look wonderful. Thank you for coming. This means a great deal to Richard and me." The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the assembled guests representing the city's financial and social elite. As Victoria led them through the crowd, Michael noted the curious glances, the whispered comments behind discreet hands. The Harringtons' estranged son-in-law and grandchildren were clearly objects of interest in this rarefied environment. Richard Harrington stood near the stage, deep in conversation with several distinguished-looking men. His face registered surprise, followed by pleasure when he spotted their approach. "Ethan, Lily, welcome to your first Harrington Foundation Gala." He turned to Michael with a nod of acknowledgement. "And Michael, thank you for bringing them. I wasn't certain you would accept the invitation. We thought it was important for the children to understand that all aspects of their heritage." Michael replied, his hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder as she gazed wide-eyed at the elaborate decorations and elegant crowd. The evening progressed with formal speeches, lavish dinner service, and carefully orchestrated social interactions. Michael watched with a mixture of amusement and pride as his children navigated the unfamiliar protocols with remarkable grace. Lily charming elderly patrons with her earnest questions about art, Ethan engaging in surprisingly sophisticated conversation with a university president about educational philosophy. As the formal program concluded, Richard approached Michael at their table, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'd like to show the children something if you'll permit it. There's an exhibition in the mezzanine gallery that I think would interest them." Michael hesitated briefly before nodding his assent. The gradual building of trust over recent months had earned Richard this small measure of faith. The mezzanine gallery had been transformed into a memorial exhibition, Sarah Harrington Parker, A Life in Art. Displayed with museum-quality lighting and professional curation were dozens of Sarah's works from childhood sketches to her final paintings. Each piece was accompanied by a small plaque providing context and commentary, creating a comprehensive narrative of her artistic development and personal journey. Ethan and Lily moved through the exhibition in stunned silence, absorbing this unexpected window into their mother's life and talent. Michael felt equally overwhelmed, recognizing familiar pieces that had hung in their home alongside works he had never seen paintings from before they met, sketches from her student days, even recent works he hadn't known existed. Richard stood slightly apart, watching their reactions with careful attention. "Victoria and I have been collecting Sarah's art since she was a child. After her passing, we discovered additional pieces in her studio at the estate works she had created during her visits home but left behind. We thought perhaps this would be a way to share her with you, to help the children understand the woman she was before she became their mother." The gesture was unexpectedly thoughtful, revealing a depth of sentiment beneath Richard's typically pragmatic exterior. He had found a way to share Sarah with her children that transcended the tensions and disagreements that had characterized their family relationships. "This is remarkable, Richard. Thank you for doing this," Michael said, genuinely moved by the effort and care evident in the exhibition. Richard nodded, uncharacteristic emotion briefly visible in his expression. She was remarkable, stubborn, idealistic, determined to forge her own path, but remarkable nonetheless. I didn't always understand her choices, but I never doubted her conviction or her talent. As they continued through the exhibition, they reached a section dedicated to Sarah's final works, paintings created during her illness, when her body was failing, but her creative vision remained clear. Among them was a triptych titled Simple Legacy, 3 panels depicting the same landscape from different perspectives. The first showed the view from the Harrington estate, grand and formal. The second captured the garden of the brownstone where Michael and Sarah had raised their children. The third panel revealed a scene Michael didn't recognize, a modest house on a tree-lined street surrounded by a vibrant community garden where adults and children worked together. She painted this just weeks before she passed, Richard explained quietly. I didn't understand it at the time. Now I think perhaps she was showing us something important, different versions of home, different kinds of legacy. The third panel confused me most of all since it wasn't any place I recognized. It's Maple Avenue, Michael realized with sudden clarity, or what Maple Avenue has become. The community garden we started last month looks almost exactly like this. Richard studied the painting with newfound understanding. She saw it before it existed. She envisioned the home you would create together even when she knew she wouldn't be there to share it. The realization was both heartbreaking and profoundly comforting. Sarah had somehow foreseen not just the challenges they would face after her death, but the new life they would eventually build. The path that had seemed so uncertain to Michael had been clear in Sarah's vision, a future she had helped create, even as her own time grew short. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria joined them in the gallery, her typical composure softened by the emotional context of the exhibition. The Harrington Foundation would like to establish a permanent scholarship in Sarah's name for young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. We thought perhaps the Parker Foundation might consider a matching grant, our 2 families working together to continue Sarah's legacy in a meaningful way. And this offer represented more than a philanthropic collaboration. It was an acknowledgement that Sarah's legacy belonged to both families, that her values could be honored through cooperation rather than conflict. Victoria was extending an olive branch, not surrender, not complete acceptance of Michael's approach to raising the children, but a genuine attempt to find common ground. I think Sarah would like that very much, Michael agreed, recognizing the significance of the moment. As they prepared to leave, Richard drew Michael aside for a private word. I've been thinking about our earlier disagreements. Perhaps I was too quick to assume that wealth and social position were the only advantages worth securing for the children. Watching them tonight, their confidence, their thoughtfulness, their genuine interest in others, I'm beginning to understand what you and Sarah valued beyond material success. It wasn't a complete concession, but it represented significant movement from Richard's previous rigid position. The acknowledgement that character and values might be as important as financial security and social connection marked a potential turning point in their relationship. They're extraordinary children, Richard, not because of their potential inheritance or social connections, but because of who they are becoming as people. That's what Sarah cared about most, not what they would have, but who they would be. Richard nodded, a flash of regret crossing his features. I wish I had understood that better while she was with us. Perhaps there would have been fewer arguments, less estrangement, more time together. The admission of regret, so uncharacteristic of Richard's typically unapologetic demeanor, revealed the grief he usually kept carefully contained beneath his businesslike exterior. For all their differences in values and approach, Michael and Richard shared the profound loss of the woman who had connected them. And in that shared loss, perhaps the beginning of genuine understanding could take root. 2 years after moving to Maple Avenue, the Parker family gathered in their backyard for a celebration. The once neglected house now stood transformed, not into a showplace of wealth or status, but into a warm, welcoming home that reflected the journey its inhabitants had traveled together. The garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers, many transplanted from Sarah's original garden at the brownstone. The newly built studio at the back of the property housed Lily's growing collection of artwork alongside preserved pieces of Sarah's that Victoria had gifted to the children. Friends and neighbors filled the yard, Margaret directing food preparation with military precision, Robert engaging a group of children with historical stories, Gabriel Santos and his family setting up tables and chairs. Rebecca Morgan arrived with a group of teachers from Lincoln, where Ethan and Lily continued to thrive academically and socially. Even the Harringtons were present, Richard somewhat stiff but making visible efforts to engage with the other guests, Victoria more relaxed than Michael had ever seen her helping Lily arrange her artwork for display. The occasion was the official launch of the Sarah Parker Community Arts Center, a joint project of the Parker Foundation and the Harrington Foundation. Housed in a renovated building just blocks from Lincoln Middle School, the center would provide arts education exhibition space for emerging artists and community gathering areas, all free of charge to neighborhood residents. It represented the vision Sarah had painted in her final triptych, a community united across differences of wealth and background, engaged in creating something meaningful together. As Michael watched his children move confidently among the guests, Ethan explaining the center's architecture to an interested neighbor, Lily proudly showing Victoria her latest paintings, he felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had since her death. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a continuing influence, a set of values and visions made manifest through the lives they were building. Elizabeth Bennet approached, a rare smile softening her typically professional demeanor. Sarah would be proud of what you've accomplished, Mr. Parker. Not just the foundation or the arts center, but the family you've nurtured through extraordinary circumstances. Michael nodded, watching as Richard Harrington awkwardly but sincerely complimented Margaret on her garden design, a small but significant bridging of worlds that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. We're still figuring it out day by day. The Harringtons and I will never agree completely on parenting philosophy or values, but we've found a way to give Ethan and Lily the best of both worlds: financial security and social connection from their grandparents, grounding in community and service from our life here. A compromise Sarah herself might have engineered, Elizabeth observed. She always did have a talent for seeing the bigger picture, for understanding how seemingly opposed perspectives might ultimately serve a common purpose. As the gathering continued into evening lanterns, illuminating the yard with warm golden light, Michael found himself on the porch steps with Ethan and Lily taking a momentary break from the celebration. In the distance, they could see the lights of downtown, the Harrington Tower rising above other buildings, its presence no longer threatening but simply part of the landscape that formed their expanded world. "Do you think Mom knew we'd end up here?" Lily asked, leaning comfortably against Michael's side. "In this house with these people?" Michael thought about Sarah's final painting, the vision of Maple Avenue she had somehow foreseen. He thought about the trust she had established, the letter she had written, the path she had helped create, even knowing she wouldn't walk it with them. "I think she hoped we would find our way to something like this. Not the exact circumstances, perhaps, but the essentials: a home built on love rather than luxury, a community based on genuine connection, a life rich in meaning and purpose." Ethan, ever practical, considered this thoughtfully. "So the money was just to make sure we could choose our own path, not to make us rich, but to give us freedom." "Exactly. Your mother understood something important, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the quality of our connections, the depth of our experiences, and the impact of our choices. Money is just a tool. What matters is what you build with it." As the guests departed from the opening celebration of the Sarah Parker Community Arts Center, Michael noticed an elderly woman lingering near the entrance. She had been watching the proceedings with quiet intensity, her weathered face registering something between wonder and nostalgia. "40 years I've lived in this neighborhood," she told Michael when he approached. "Never thought I'd see the day we'd have a place like this for our children and grandchildren." "It was my wife's vision," Michael explained. "She believed art should be accessible to everyone." The woman nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My granddaughter wants to be an artist. Never had the chance myself, had to work 2 jobs after high school. But now she can come here, learn properly." Such encounters had become increasingly common in the months since the Arts Center opened its doors. People from the neighborhood would stop Michael on the street to share how the programs had impacted their families. Teenagers finding productive outlets for their creativity, senior citizens discovering new passions in retirement, children developing skills and confidence they might never have found elsewhere. What had begun as a memorial to Sarah had evolved into something living and vital, a beating heart at the center of a community that was transforming itself, one class, one exhibition, one gathering at a time. The center operated on a unique model, combining the resources of 2 family foundations with very different philosophies. The Parker Foundation provided the guiding vision, ensuring that programs remained accessible and responsive to community needs. The Harrington Foundation contributed its vast network of connections, bringing in renowned artists and educators, who might otherwise never have set foot in this neighborhood. The collaboration wasn't without tension. Richard still occasionally suggested exclusive programs that would create a two-tiered system, one for gifted students and another for everyone else. Victoria sometimes failed to understand why Michael insisted on hiring staff from the neighborhood rather than bringing in professionals with prestigious credentials. But these differences were now navigated through conversation rather than conflict. They had learned to value each other's perspectives, to find the balance between Sarah's two legacies, the Harrington drive for excellence and the Parker commitment to inclusivity. The children had become the unexpected mediators in this evolving relationship. Ethan, with his analytical mind, would point out the practical benefits of Michael's community-centered approach. Lily, with her artist's empathy, could help her grandparents see the human impact of their decisions. They moved between the worlds of Maple Avenue and the Harrington estate with increasing ease, taking what they valued from each without being defined by either. As Ethan entered adolescence, his interest in architecture had blossomed into a passion. Richard had tentatively offered to introduce him to some of the architects who had designed Harrington properties over the years. Michael had agreed with the clear understanding that this was exploration, not expectation. The first such meeting had been a revelation. Ethan had arrived with a portfolio of his own sketches, detailed drawings of buildings that combined beauty with function in ways that impressed even the veteran architects. More significantly, many of his designs incorporated elements from both worlds. The elegant proportions of classical architecture Richard admired alongside innovative community spaces that reflected Michael's values. He has a remarkable ability to synthesize disparate influences, one architect told Richard. He doesn't see the conflict between tradition and innovation that most of us struggle with. For him, they're just different tools to achieve a unified vision. Richard had repeated these words to Michael with undisguised pride. The grandfather who had once hoped to mold his grandson into a successor was now learning from the boy's unique perspective. It was a subtle but profound shift in their relationship. Lily's artistic development had followed a similar pattern of integration rather than conflict. Under Victoria's guidance, she had gained access to formal training that honed her technical skills. But the content of her work remained firmly rooted in her life on Maple Avenue portraits of neighbors, scenes from the community garden, moments of connection captured with remarkable emotional depth. One evening, Victoria had arrived at the house carrying a large, carefully wrapped package. "I found this in storage," she explained, presenting it to Lily with unusual hesitation. "It was Sarah's first serious easel, the one my mother gave her when she was about your age. I thought perhaps you might like to have it." The easel was beautiful, solid cherry wood, crafted by hand, bearing the patina that comes only from years of loving use. Lily had run her fingers over its surface, reverently touching the spots worn smooth where Sarah's hands had rested. "Can you tell me about when she used it?" she had asked Victoria. "What did she paint first?" That question had opened a floodgate of memories. Victoria spent the evening sharing stories of Sarah's early artistic endeavors, some triumphant, others hilariously misguided. For the first time, she spoke of her daughter without the stiffness of grief, laughing at the recollection of a 12-year-old Sarah stubbornly attempting to paint in the rain because the light was perfect, returning home drenched but exhilarated. "You have her determination," Victoria told Lily, "but you're wiser about when to persist and when to adapt. I think that comes from your father." The comment, a simple acknowledgement of Michael's positive influence on his daughter, marked how far they had come from those tense confrontations after Sarah's death. Victoria might never fully embrace the values that guided Michael's parenting, but she had come to respect the results. The Harrington Tower still dominated the city skyline, its gleaming facade a symbol of wealth and power, but it no longer cast a shadow over the Parker family. Instead, it had become simply one landmark among many in the children's expanding world, a place they visited occasionally to see their grandfather's office or attend a special event, but not a destination that defined their aspirations. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond the Arts Center to include educational initiatives throughout the city. Drawing on his experience as a teacher, Michael had developed scholarship programs that identified promising students from underserved communities and provided not just financial support, but the mentorship and practical assistance necessary for success. "Money alone doesn't overcome barriers," he explained to potential donors at a foundation event. A scholarship means little if a student doesn't have reliable transportation to campus or must work full-time while studying or lacks the social capital to navigate institutional systems designed for those who already have advantages. This holistic approach had initially confused some of the Harringtons' wealthy friends who were accustomed to philanthropy that consisted of writing checks and attending galas. But when they saw the results, students thriving who might otherwise have fallen through the cracks, many became enthusiastic supporters. One cool autumn evening, almost 3 years after their move to Maple Avenue, Michael sat in his small home office reviewing applications for the Foundation's newest initiative, a program that would provide startup funding for community-based businesses in neighborhoods similar to their own. He had been struck by how many of the applicants shared a common vision, not just commercial success, but revitalization of the places they called home. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. Ethan stood in the doorway, his lanky 13-year-old frame awkward, but his expression determined. "Dad, can I talk to you about something important?" "Of course." Michael set aside the files, giving his son his full attention. Ethan sat down, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his shirt, a rare show of nervousness from a boy who typically approached life with confident precision. "Grandfather offered to pay for me to attend Edgewater Academy for high school." Michael kept his expression neutral, though his heart rate quickened. "I see. And how do you feel about that?" "I told him I needed to think about it." Ethan met his father's gaze directly. "There's a special architecture program there. Students get to work with professional architects on real projects. It's pretty amazing." "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Michael said carefully. "But Lincoln has my friends in the math team and it's close to home." And Ethan hesitated. "I'm worried that if I go to Edgewater, I'll become different." "Different how?" "Like those kids at the gala. They were nice enough, but they talked about money all the time, where they went on vacation, what cars their parents drive." Ethan's brow furrowed in concentration. "It's not that I think I'm better than them. It's just we care about different things." Michael recognized the dilemma his son was facing, the same one Sarah had navigated throughout her life, balancing the advantages of privilege against the risk of being shaped by values she didn't share. "What does your heart tell you?" Michael asked. Ethan gave a half smile. "That's what Mom would say, isn't it?" "It is. She believed in trusting your instincts about what feels right." "I think," Ethan said slowly, "I want to stay at Lincoln, but maybe I could still do some of the special architecture workshops at Edgewater. As an outside student, Grandfather said that might be possible." "That sounds like a thoughtful compromise," Michael said, proud of his son's clarity. "A way to access the opportunity without giving up what matters to you." "I wasn't sure how you'd feel," Ethan admitted. "I thought maybe you'd be disappointed if I wanted to go, or worried I'd turn into a snob or something." Michael laughed softly. "Ethan, all I've ever wanted is for you to make choices that feel true to who you are. The danger isn't in attending any particular school, it's in letting others define what success means for you." Your mother understood that. It's why she established the foundation the way she did, to give you options, not dictate your path. "Lily's thinking about Edgewater too," Ethan confided, "for their arts program. But she's even more worried than I am about fitting in." "Your sister will find her way," Michael said, "just as you will, and whatever you both decide, this will always be home." Home, the word had taken on new depth over the years. The house on Maple Avenue was no longer just a refuge from crisis, but the center of a life they had built together. Each repair, each improvement, each memory layered upon the last like brushstrokes on a canvas. The community garden Sarah had envisioned in her final painting now stretched across several adjoining yards, neighbors having gradually torn down fences to create a shared space where vegetables and flowers grew in abundant profusion. Children from the block learned about planting and harvesting. Elderly residents, who might otherwise have been isolated, found purpose in tending to specific plots, and the bounty was shared with anyone who needed it. Michael had initially worried that the revelation of the Parker Foundation's assets would change how their neighbors perceived them. But the people of Maple Avenue had a finely tuned authenticity detector. They judged the Parkers not by their bank account, but by their continued participation in the life of the community. Michael still helping with neighborhood repairs, the children still playing in the street games that had no admission fee, the family still showing up when someone was in need. The Harringtons, too, had been changed by their involvement with Maple Avenue. Victoria had initially approached her volunteer work at the Arts Center with the noblesse oblige of the privileged helping the less fortunate. But over time, she had developed genuine relationships with the other volunteers, finding herself dropping her practice society manners for more authentic exchanges. Richard's transformation had been even more surprising. The man who once measured value in financial terms had become an advocate for preserving neighborhoods like Maple Avenue from commercial development. These communities have a social infrastructure that can't be replicated in planned developments, he argued at a city council meeting, using concepts he had learned from Michael. The wealth they contain isn't visible on balance sheets, but it's no less real or valuable. Not everyone had been convinced by his arguments, but his willingness to use his considerable influence in service of a different vision represented a profound evolution. One Saturday morning, Michael was surprised to find Robert Collins on his doorstep, accompanied by a real estate agent he didn't recognize. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Robert said, "but I wanted to speak with you about an important matter." Michael invited them in, curious about his mentor's unusually formal demeanor. "The truth is," Robert explained once they were seated in the living room, "I'm getting too old to maintain my house properly. My son has been after me to move closer to his family in Arizona." "We'd miss you terribly," Michael said, realizing with a pang how much he had come to rely on Robert's steady presence. "That's just it." Robert smiled. "I've found I'm rather attached to this neighborhood and the people in it, so I've decided to sell my house and purchase something smaller right here on Maple Avenue." He gestured to the agent. "Ms. Johnson tells me that the property next door to yours is coming on the market. The owner is moving to a retirement community." "That would be wonderful," Michael said sincerely. "The children would be thrilled to have you as a neighbor." "There's more," Robert continued. "The house needs significant renovation, more than I can manage at my age. But I thought perhaps we might reach an arrangement. The Parker Foundation could purchase the property, renovate it to create housing for artists and residents at the Arts Center, and include a small apartment where I could live independently, but with support close at hand." Michael was touched by the elegant solution which addressed both Robert's needs and an issue the Arts Center had been struggling with: how to accommodate visiting artists without the prohibitive cost of hotel stays. "That's a brilliant idea, Robert. It honors the Foundation's mission while ensuring you remain part of our community. I'll bring it to the board immediately." After Robert and the agent left, Michael found himself thinking about how naturally the various strands of their lives had begun to weave together: the Foundation's work, the neighborhood's needs, the relationships they had built. What had once seemed like separate worlds in conflict were revealing themselves as complementary aspects of a whole. He thought of the conversation he'd had with Margaret Wilson just the previous evening. She had been reflecting on how the neighborhood had changed since the Arts Center opened. "It's not just the new programs or the renovated buildings," she had said. "It's how people walk differently down the street with their heads up, looking around, greeting each other. There's a sense of possibility that wasn't there before." "Sarah would have loved that," Michael had replied. Margaret had smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh, she sees it. Make no mistake about that." It was the kind of statement Michael would once have dismissed as well-intentioned but empty comfort. Yet he found himself increasingly open to the possibility that Sarah's presence continued in ways that transcended simple memory, that her vision lived on not just in the Foundation's work or in the traits the children had inherited, but in the daily choices that honored what she had valued most. Later that day, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, Michael watched Lily preparing for her first solo exhibition at the Arts Center. She had set up her easel in the garden and was putting the finishing touches on a portrait of Ethan, capturing not just his physical appearance, but something essential about his character: the quiet determination in his eyes, the thoughtful set of his mouth. Victoria sat nearby, offering occasional gentle suggestions about technique, while Ethan pretended to be annoyed at having to hold still, but couldn't quite hide his pride in being the subject of his sister's art. The scene grandmother, granddaughter, and grandson engaged in a creative endeavor that bridged their different worlds would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. "You've changed the entire trajectory of these children's lives," Margaret observed, joining Michael as he watched from the porch. "And in doing so, you've changed Richard and Victoria too." "Sarah changed it," Michael corrected gently. "She saw what was possible before any of us did." "Perhaps," Margaret conceded, "but seeing a possibility is one thing. Building it when all the odds are against you, that takes a different kind of courage. She chose you because she knew you had that courage, even if you didn't know it yourself. As evening approached, the family gathered for dinner in the backyard, joined by Margaret Robert and Gabriel Santos and his family. The table was set with mismatched plates, some from thrift stores, others fine china that Victoria had brought from the Harrington collection, insisting that beautiful things should be used and enjoyed rather than stored away. The conversation flowed easily, spanning topics from city politics to Ethan's latest architectural designs to Miguel Santos's baseball team making the regional championships. Richard, arriving late from a business meeting, slipped into the empty chair beside Michael, accepting a plate from Mrs. Kim, who had brought her famous dumplings. "I had an interesting conversation today with the mayor," Richard said quietly to Michael, as the others debated the merits of different baseball strategies. "He's interested in expanding the Arts Center model to other neighborhoods. He thinks it could be a template for community revitalization throughout the city." "That would be remarkable," Michael replied, "but it would require significant funding beyond what our foundations could provide." "I've been thinking about that." Richard nodded. "What if we created a consortium of local businesses and foundations? Each would adopt a neighborhood, provide the initial investment, but with the explicit understanding that the programs must be guided by the residents themselves, using your approach of building on existing community strengths rather than imposing external solutions." Michael recognized the significance of what Richard was proposing, not just an expansion of their work, but an endorsement of the philosophy behind it. The businessman who had once measured success in profits and power was now advocating for a model based on community self-determination and shared prosperity. "Sarah would approve of that approach," Michael said. "I think she would," Richard agreed, a fleeting sadness crossing his features before resolving into determination. "It's time her vision reached beyond a single neighborhood, don't you think?" As the meal concluded and lanterns were lit against the gathering dusk, Lily asked for everyone's attention. "I want to show you all something," she announced, her voice carrying the quiet confidence she had developed over the years. She led the group to the side of the house where a sheet had been draped over what appeared to be a large canvas. With a dramatic flourish worthy of her artistic temperament, she pulled the sheet away to reveal a mural painted directly on the exterior wall, a detailed rendering of Maple Avenue, seen from above with the houses, gardens, and people depicted in vibrant color. But it wasn't a literal representation. In Lily's vision, the boundaries between yards had disappeared, replaced by flowing pathways connecting all the homes. The Arts Center stood at one edge of the composition, the Harrington Tower visible in the distance, neither dominant, but both integral to the landscape. And throughout the scene, small vignettes of daily life unfolded: children playing neighbors, talking gardens, growing a community in harmony with itself. "It's called the inheritance," Lily explained. "It's what Mom left us, not just a house or money, but a way of seeing the world where everything connects." As the gathered family and friends admired the mural, offering praise and identifying themselves in the detailed tableau, Michael stood slightly apart, overwhelmed by the realization that his daughter had captured exactly what he had been trying to articulate to himself, that Sarah's true legacy wasn't the foundation or the Arts Center or even the values she had tried to instill. It was the connection she had made possible, the relationships that had transformed individual lives into a community. Later, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to bed, Michael sat alone on the front steps, watching the quiet street where they had rebuilt their lives. He took Sarah's wedding ring from his pocket, turning it in the moonlight as he had done so often in those first desperate days on Maple Avenue. "You were right, love," he whispered, "about everything." A gentle breeze suddenly stirred, carrying the scent from the garden roses, Sarah's favorite flower. For a fleeting moment, he could have sworn he felt her hand brush against his cheek. The simple gold band caught the light, reflecting not memories now, but possibilities. Been all that might yet be. With a sense of completion he hadn't expected, Michael slipped the ring back into his pocket and went inside to the home they had built together, to the life that continued to unfold in ways no inheritance could predict or purchase. For in the end, the most valuable legacy isn't measured in millions of dollars, but in the inheritance of love, courage, and purpose that no amount of money can buy or replace. This was the secret of legacy, not hidden in trust documents or legal arrangements, but living in the daily choices that shape character, in the values passed from parent to child, in the courage to prioritize what truly matters when tested by circumstance. Sarah had left them not just financial security, but a roadmap to a life of meaning. And in following it, they had discovered that the truest wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we build together.